So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Keep your business wheels spinning with the right modern slavery framework with Stephen Morse. Today, you are listening in using your computer speaker system by default. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to Stephen by typing them into the questions pane on the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end. So, Dr. Stephen Morse is the CEO of Unchained Solutions. Based in Sydney, Stephen leads a team of modern slavery consultants who provide a turnkey solution to help Australian organisations to comply with the Modern Slavery Act. Through his extensive research and lived experience abroad, Stephen demonstrates empathy for those who need to address modern slavery and shines a light on how leaders can innovate, engage and embrace the opportunities to develop responsible business practices and resilient supply chains. I will now hand this over to Stephen, so I'll just mute myself. Go for it, Stephen.
Great. Thanks, Tony. And it's really good to be here with everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It's really great that Unchained can form this partnership with APPA. We've been working with Wes for some time now to work out how best to engage the members of APPA, and we really are pleased to be able to assist you in helping you to comply with the needs of your clients, corporate clients, in relation to the issue of modern slavery and the Modern Slavery Act. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, recognizing that people are joining us from many places, perhaps even outside Australia at the moment. Today I'm speaking from Gadigal country, upon which parts of the northern beaches of Sydney are based. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Unchained acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to the elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Well, I'd like to begin with a little bit of an introduction to what we're on about and what we're doing here today. Hopefully you can see my screen, although that didn't work effectively. I'll try that again. Here we go. Perfect. Great. So here today we're going to, as our first workshop that we're doing for the APPA member community, is really about how we can keep your wheels spinning with the right modern slavery framework. And we've coined it like that because we really see there's big shifts happening in the area of ESG reporting. So that's around environmental, social and governance. So that's what ESG stands for, if you're not aware of the acronyms, and I'll try and unpack the acronyms today because I know there's can be a few of them. And this is really where mainly it's coming from the big end of town, originally from financial services, but it's really the pressure is mounting as more and more organizations and companies, government entities are adopting the emerging reporting mechanisms around ESG. And there's obviously some controversy around this, some contention around some of the issues, particularly at the political level, regarding environmental concerns and climate change and net zero targets and the like. So really the question for small business in this game of ESG reporting is not so much to, well, you can have an opinion on where you think, on what you think about all these matters, but really it's about thinking through what it means for me as a business, as a small business, and what I can do to actually remain agile, robust, and business ready for what maybe you're experiencing now and what is definitely emerging and coming in the future. So let me just begin. We're going to spend some time for me speaking, so I hope you can indulge me in that. But I do invite you to ask questions. Just put some questions in the chat. I think Tony's going to moderate those questions, and I'll do my presentation first, and then we'll come back to those questions. So if you do have questions along the way, please make note of them, put them in the chat, and we'll do what we can to address. We've got time today. I like to engage with people, so I don't like just to be like a monologue. So I'll get through my piece, if you like, and then I'm happy to to take questions and make this more interactive for you. A little bit about Unchained. Our mission is to inspire Australian organisations to be leaders in making an impact on modern slavery. So that's what we're about. We're about inspiring leadership and impact. We want to see, we see lots of scope for companies and business leaders to demonstrate leadership in this space, and there's a great need for it. To be inspired to do so, to inspire teams and to inspire a culture change in the way that we do business. And really to make an impact, and that's a really tricky piece. How do we actually make an impact on modern slavery, particularly when so many of the issues that we're thinking about are so far away from us, so far removed at times, and beyond even the reach of the dollar, perhaps the dollar spend that we have? How do we actually engage with this constructively and make the impact and realize that that impact is going to be happening over the long term? Our vision is to see the Modern Slavery Act implemented by every boardroom. It may not seem like a very sort of exciting vision, but really we see the Modern Slavery Act as a great reporting mechanism that can be transferred into other impact areas. And it's really a great mechanism because it's about continuous improvement to actually help business to make a positive social impact. As for us, Unchained is, we see ourselves as a social enterprise in the sense that we actively support not-for-profits and social enterprises that are actually working directly with suppliers. So while we're based in a very plush part of Sydney, we're mindful that a lot of the exploitation is happening in different parts of the world, and we don't want to lose contact with that. So part of our commitment to the space is to support the Freedom Business Alliance, an alliance of around 100 small businesses like you, perhaps, who are scattered throughout, mainly throughout Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, who provide survivors of modern slavery with vocational training and meaningful employment. So it's kind of like after someone perhaps has come out of some therapeutic process, overcome their trauma, part of the next stage is to help them to build their lives. And so we're really committed as a business to supporting small business and those businesses that are working with survivors. Our value is really a blend of a unique lived experience that many on our team have. The backstory to Unchained is really the work that I and my wife were directors of Unchained. So Sarah and myself, we spent 5 years working in Madrid, Spain, with survivors of sex trafficking. And that's also where I did my academic doctoral research on the subject of human trafficking. We've blended this with expertise on the team around the knowledge of tools and expertise to help around the assessment of risk, strategy and policy development, training, and the engagement of employees. And really we sort of pitch ourselves in the sustainable development goal space by addressing 4 key goals. One is around gender, because there's a huge gender imbalance when it comes to modern slavery risk. Decent work, which is kind of the crux of what we're about. We're actually wanting to make sure that everyone has access to decent work and appropriate contracts and pay. We're about responsible consumption and responsible production of that consumption, because we just see a world full of waste and too much waste, which actually plays into the exploitation as well. And we're about partnerships. So Unchained is committed to partners, working with lots of different partners, including APPA and other peak body associations, to actually, because we believe that this issue and related human rights violations are not going to be resolved unless we actually work together. So that's our commitment to and our value. What we have at Unchained, we're a solution provider. So we have 5 solution areas around strategy, analysis, training, documents, and research. And under that, those 5 key areas, we have a number of service areas. And really how this works for us and our clients, regardless of your size, regardless of your reporting status, if you are a massive company and you're ASX listed and you need to comply, or you're an SME and you've got a tender process and you need to step up to the plate and tick a box that says, I am modern slavery due diligent compliant. We have a range of services that we can pitch to the level of the company, the size and their level of maturity, and actually help you at where you're at and take you on that journey, that process. And we can wrap all those services around your particular needs. And we're providing a number of services to APPA based on what the executive think are the main needs of this association. Our sectors, we're largely industry agnostic, and we've worked in a range of sectors now over the last 3 to 4 years, from mining, education, agriculture, finance, construction, health, logistics, retail, and not-for-profits. So we've crossed a number of sectors, and that's been a really great opportunity for us to understand where the risks are in different sectors and actually help companies. So being an issues-based solution provider, we're not put off by any industry. We see great value in engaging companies regardless of where they're coming from, and we've got a breadth of experience to help them with that. So really today, what I want to do is start off by looking at the risk of modern slavery. What is that? What does that look like? And some examples. What is the impact really of the modern slavery legislation at both the Commonwealth and New South Wales level, because we have two modern anti-slavery pieces of law at work at the moment, particularly on corporate Australia. What are they being asked to do? And then what is the impact therefore on small business? How do small businesses, how do you as a APPA member, as a small business play in the space? We've got then some key steps for small business, and I've just gone through Unchained. That's we can then discuss a little bit more about what we do here and how we might be able to assist you. So beginning then with the risk of modern slavery. My entry into this comes from something that I've witnessed, something that I've been part of helping with a client that you may recall, may not have recalled, an incident that occurred around May 2022 last year regarding the shipping company AG Neptune. This is a Liberian-owned ship. And this ship was arrested, if you like, off the coast of New South Wales at the port of Newcastle. After two issues were raised regarding the ship. One had to do with the contamination of the fuel. The fuel was owned by Viva Energy, which is a large energy provider in Australia. The second had to do with the exploitation of 21 seamen who were being underpaid, severely underpaid. They were owed around $120,000 in income collectively. And they were also suffering from low food quality, water access, and medical supplies. And all these issues were human rights violations according to international maritime standards. Our clients asked us, is not Viva Energy, but has Viva Energy as one of their main suppliers. And so they were very keen, as part of their own modern slavery due diligence work, to understand how come this incident occurred? Why was it not just the environmental consideration, but why was there a human rights violation? In fact, it does raise the question, if the environmental concern around the contamination of the fuel had not been raised, would the human rights issue have been identified by the authorities? So here we have a situation. So we stepped in to look at what Viva Energy was saying about themselves, what Vital, which was the charter company for the ship, had to say about themselves, what the owner of the shipping company had to say about themselves, looking at all the checks and balances in place and really trying to work out for our client what their response should be to Viva Energy, who was in a sense, the main player in this game, trying to work out why was it that, first of all, not just the environmental concern, but why was the allegations raised and why were there 21 men being exploited on the ship, and how did that occur? There was no great resolution to this, except to say that the maritime authorities banished the ship, sort of banned the ship from Australian waters for 6 months. Yeah, in a sense, that was their punishment for this situation. And it was in looking into the checks and balances, it was really unclear how this occurred in the first place and how these men had come to be exploited. But it does raise the issue of global supply chains and the complexity of global supply chains, and what are some of the issues at stake for big companies, particularly around reputational, financial, and legal risks, and in a sense the interconnectivity between buyers and suppliers and partner organizations, because my client had no direct relationship with the shipping company except they had their supplier was using that ship, and so there were implications. So that just, in a sense, is an introduction to the complexity of this issue and what's going on at a global level. Coming down to some definitions from Unseen UK. Modern slavery is the commodification of people for the purpose of exploitation and financial gain. So when we're thinking about the issue of modern slavery, we are looking at something which is transactional, where people are actually traded for the financial gain of others. And unfortunately, it's an issue which is growing in our world. It's not getting smaller. It's not going away. And this is despite the emergence of legislation at both a soft international level and a hard local level to actually address this issue. So the issue is increasing, and our understanding of the issue is also increasing. Just some more definitions. We could define modern slavery in two main ways. The first would be at a human rights approach, and that is the lack of choice, voice, and movement. So we have a situation where a person's freedom is severely restricted or taken away, and they have limited movement, limited choices, and they are not allowed to speak out. That is, in a sense, in a very acute definition of modern slavery. It's also been used as a legislative term, so it's been adopted by the Australian government and the government of the United Kingdom to describe a range, an umbrella term to describe a range of human rights violations of a similar kind. So we're thinking about issues of forced labour, which is the largest category, forced servitude, that's more, in a sense, a domestic situation, debt bondage, where someone has to actually borrow money in order to function, to live, and finds themselves in a situation where they can't pay off that debt, and they have to work in order to pay off that debt because the interest rates are incredibly high. Child labour plays into this. Not all child labour, but extreme forms of child labour. Forced marriage is an issue, and it's a big issue here in Australia. And human trafficking, which is the kind of where the movement of people. So these types of modern slavery don't work necessarily in isolation. They work in tandem. A person, for example, who is in debt bondage might be trafficked into another part of the world and then put to might find themselves in a situation of forced labor. So they can, in a sense, work in tandem. It's very difficult for organizations to find cases of modern slavery, and it's one of the, I suppose, key frustrations at this stage is to really identify at a consistent level where the risks are, because it's an issue hidden in plain sight. So there are a number of indicators that we use to identify the risk, and from my perspective, the greater the cluster of indicators, the more likeliness then we have a case of modern slavery. So we're thinking of things like low pay or no pay, people who are civilly being underpaid. It's more than wage theft, which is a big issue in parts in some industries in Australia. This is where people are actually virtually earning maybe, $2 or $3 a day, or $1 or even to an hour for the work they're doing. So excessive hours, again, which could be also seen in Australia, people overworking, but we're looking at situations where people their days off are compromised. They're needing to do overtime in order to meet the demands of a client who needs a row of t-shirts, for example, or to fulfill an order. There could be recruitment fees, fees which are issued in order to get the job. You need to spend, thousands of dollars just to get the job, and therefore you might need to borrow money to do that, which then can increase the risk. Lack of contracts. There might be short-term contracts or proper contracts. So people, in a sense, that mitigates against voice. So if people just are employed on short-term contracts, then if they're not happy, then, well, the contracts aren't renewed. So if they want to speak out, then they can't, because, well, they'll just end the contract. Loss of identity is key. People's passports and identity papers are taken away from them. Fines for all sorts of infringements in order to control people's behavior. An unsafe workspace could also be there, a factory which has unsafe machinery, but also unsafe in the sense of air quality, water quality, lack of sanitation, waste management. All those issues relate and dovetail human rights violations with environmental concerns as well. So it can often be the case that a factory that is not well maintained will also not be will not have good practice in terms of worker relations, industrial relations. And then other issues around coercion, threats, intimidation, and violence, physical and sexual as well. So the safety of the person is compromised. People aren't necessarily put in shackles, although there are severe cases, for example, in the case of the online sexual exploitation of children, in which children are actually controlled, highly controlled, and there's a need for them to be physically rescued by police forces out of those scenarios. Most of the situations in where people are exploited, it's actually got to do with is more through economic means of coercion, threats, and the loss of income, the loss of job. So all these mechanisms can play into modern slavery. In terms of the scope, current stats from the International Labour Organization now put the risk around 50 million people. This is up, say, from 10 years ago, in which it was 40, and maybe even 25 years ago, it was about 26. These big numbers can be a bit challenging to digest, in the sense that really we don't know how big it is, how many people, and this could be, in a sense, a conservative figure. Really, one of the challenges for some of these organizations like ILO and Walk Free is actually determining cases of modern slavery and the different countries and the risk indicators per those countries and where the risks are going to be. So a country, for example, one of the highest countries for risk is North Korea, where 20% of the population would be deemed to be in some form of labor exploitation. There's a big discrepancy here in terms of the employment of children. 1 in 4 children, and so 1 in 4 victims are children, and 73% are women and girls. So we're looking at an issue that really is there's a gender issue here, where the most vulnerable people in communities are those who are most impacted. As I mentioned earlier, around 61% of all cases are in forced labor. So we're looking at situations in factories, on farms, and even on fishing boats. They're probably the 3 main areas. This is where people are actually having to experience all those kind of indicators that we mentioned before. We're looking naturally at a multi-billion-dollar industry driven by crime groups, by syndicates, by the mafia, by organized crime. When it comes to Australia, we don't really have recent stats. These stats are probably now about 6 years old. It's deemed to be, there's a, conservatively, again, from the Walk Free Foundation, around 15,000 cases in Australia. But the ratio of 1 to 5 comes from Anti-Slavery Australia. And here, this is kind of probably the most relevant to us, is that only 1 in 5 cases are reported. So we have a situation in Australia where there is a lack of reporting. People who are being exploited don't want to speak out because they don't know what the consequences are going to be. The pathways for care are not clear. Demonstrating that you are a victim of modern slavery is a key challenge in Australia that's currently being discussed by the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, Dr. James Cockayne, as they think through all the sort of the referral pathways and the care processes for cases in New South Wales. It's a system which is largely dysfunctional, and there's no clear pathway for people to get the help that they need at this present time, despite the fact that there are great organizations out there providing such care, such as the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, among others. In terms of the examples, getting to sort of more detail around what we're thinking of, we can think of modern slavery, and some of the more sort of popular ideas around modern slavery risk have to do with the high consumables, which in a sense do pertain to APPA and its members. Issues around the production of coffee and cocoa and tea is a big area. So, and a lot of spotlight has been put on this for many years now, particularly by fair trade and the development of fair trade products to actually bring a spotlight onto what's going on, particularly in places like West Africa, where some of the big chocolatiers source their beans. Another big area spotlight is around the apparel industry, which has a very complex and long supply chain. And this area was made famous back in 2013 with the collapse of the Rana Plaza in Dhaka, Bangladesh, in which over 1,100 women were killed when a factory collapsed there. And it really put a spotlight internationally on the issue of fashion and fast fashion, and the pressure that big brands have been putting on factories in places like Bangladesh to actually provide clothing at quite a huge quantity and a rapid speed. And speed is kind of a big issue when it comes to risk. The demand we have for produce at in terms of quality and speed actually exacerbates the kind of indicators, the situations that people find themselves working in. Finally, then, a more recent area of investigation has to do with fishing and the production of seafood, and a lot of work has been done to understand the risks in particularly off the coast of Thailand, and equally a lot of work's been done by Thai Union, which is one of the largest senior seafood manufacturer in Thailand, to actually address these risks and really highlight the way in which young men especially are kept at sea for months, if not years at a time, until they're too weak to seek to work, and then they're just tossed overboard, and that's the end. So from pretty stark scenarios, the big spotlight is on these areas, but the spotlight needs to, in a sense, move to what is some of the products that are not so visible at a consumer level. So, for example, if we looked at any issue or any industry, we could probably scratch the surface and see that there are risks there as well. There are lots of risks, for example, in construction, both at the production of the materials, the construction materials, and also at the work site as well. And that's probably the two things that we need to consider, both the sourcing of products and services that build the industry, as well as the people who actually service those industries. And if we look more closely at Australia, we can see that these are probably the main areas in which there are risks here. Cleaning is a big issue, and a lot of work's been done by such organisations as the Cleaning Accountability Framework to address this issue with property owners, particularly those who own large buildings and big facilities, to actually do the due diligence to ensure that the risks are minimised. Some of these industries, for example, cleaning, rely on subcontracting, and that's often where the risk occurs, particularly where it might be a family scenario and people are actually exploited through the family kind of dynamic mechanism. Other areas, big areas around agriculture, and there's a spectrum of risk around that in agriculture in terms of particularly the harvesting, the fruit picking season. At the high level, we might say there are lots of people, particularly backpackers and students, who will, in a sense, experience different levels of exploitation. They might have to live in sort of substandard accommodation. They might need to, and I've met these people, they might actually have to pay for the insurance of the truck that they're going to put the fruit on, which is bizarre. They might need to suffer all sorts of minor infringements with a view to the bigger picture of which they're looking at, and that is maybe to extend their visa and stay in Australia. And so they might put up with certain behaviours and situations, mainly because A, it's short term, they're not enslaved, and that, well, they wouldn't know where to go to get the help in the first place. It's often the case that by the time the Fair Work Ombudsman, which investigates these kind of matters, the syndicate, the recruitment agency that's sort of managing the recruitment of these people, has liquidated and disappeared and emerged as another entity. So there's lots of complexity in the vast landscape of Australia. So there's a bit of a snapshot of what's going on in Australia: retail services, nail salons, car cleaning, security services, and the issue of forced marriage as well. Both marriages, people who are brought here for marriage, who are underage or who are here under coercion, under threat, as well as marriages that occur here in Australia as well. And this is an issue that's very much at the forefront of thinking of, particularly around for the Red Cross and Salvation Army and others who are actually looking at issues of how we can actually support those who are in situations of forced marriage in Australia. So that's kind of the sort of the broad picture of modern slavery. And I just want to move now to consider what is the legislation, what does the legislation actually achieve, and what are the aims and what are the impacts of the Modern Slavery Act at both the Commonwealth and New South Wales level. Primarily the Commonwealth legislation, which is, I suppose, more in play, particularly for the private sector. We could probably say that over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been an emergence of hard legislation to address issues of human rights, and including modern slavery. And this is all on the back of the Sustainable Development Goals, sort of soft United Nations guidelines and targets that is occurring at intergovernmental and UN level. These are all being translated into hard legislation in different parts of the world, and we're seeing legislation emerge in Western Europe, in France, Netherlands, Germany, United Kingdom, the state of California, Australia. There's legislation emerging in New Zealand, and also there's legislation in Canada. So legislation around human rights due diligence is emerging in different parts of the world, and it's shifting the conversation in terms of what are companies doing and how they behave and how they actually treat their supply chains. One of the key changes that has occurred is with the United States, who over the last 12 months has made changes to their customs. So now customs reserves the right to reject products that are being made in the Xinjiang province in China. And so companies now need to make sure that whatever they're bringing in to the United States from China has not actually been made at any point in that province where there are allegations of forced labor among the Uyghur people group. One of the leading figures in the space is Louis C. DeBucker. He's an American former ambassador at large on modern slavery and human trafficking. And from his perspective, he says, well, it's not a question of if, but where and to what extent there is slavery in your supply chains and operations. And so really, when we think about this issue, it's really only a matter of time as we start scratching the surface, as we start looking, we start poking, so we will find issues. And so the dynamic that we're playing with here is you can sit back and do not much and you won't find much. But as you actually apply yourself, that you will find things. And I remember interviewing members of the team at sorry, just had a blank mind there. Outland Denim, thank you. I'm interviewing the team at Outland Denim, who are based in Australia in terms of their head office, but their factories are in Cambodia, and really talking to them about the work that they're doing as a social enterprise to go out of their way to mitigate the risks, not just sort of be satisfied with what data they've received or analyzed, or what's coming out of reports, but to actually be proactive in doing everything they can to unravel their supply chains and take the issue seriously. And I think that's really what we would probably call good practice in terms of due diligence. Due diligence is not necessarily just about putting the right governance or risk management framework in place. Due diligence is actually about taking those foundational steps and actually going out of your way. And when you do, you will find there are risks for you to attend to. The reporting mechanism that the government's issued through the Modern Slavery Act could really be summarized in two main words, and I could probably add a third one. The key two words are transparency and responsibility. So it's asking reporting entities that those who generate more than 100 million in annual consolidated revenue to identify the risks and to be transparent about that. So there's a big transparency piece, which obviously has risks embedded in it, that as companies open up and declare what they're doing, declare what they've found, then there are obviously going to be risks around that. But the government this is the game that the government has put in play, that really the act of transparency is not about penalizing companies. It's actually about identifying how we can actually then collaborate with others to actually address those risks. So transparency brings the issue to light. The other side of the coin then is responsibility. And here is really, once we've identified those risks, what are we going to do? What kind of strategy are we going to put in place? What acts of remediation, for example, what could we do internally, for example, in terms of our policies, in terms of having a code of conduct or a supplier code of conduct or a grievance mechanism, or to update our whistleblower policy? That's internally. What can I do externally to engage with my suppliers, to resource those suppliers, to educate those suppliers, and in a sense, collaborate with my suppliers to mitigate those risks? What can I do if there is a case of modern slavery to actually remedy something? If I see a case and there's a sense in which I need to act, and I've worked out and determined that, you know, this is something for us. We have contributed here. We are in a sense connected to this risk. What can I do to actually provide remedy for that? And that could really, in a sense, it could be, or that could have to do with, you know, looking at a factory situation. What could we do to work with the factory to improve machinery, to improve water quality, to improve air quality, to improve food safety, to improve sanitation, to put in a toilet in a factory, for example, because for the women in there, because the factory only has toilets for men, not women. All these kind of acts are tangible, concrete, and actually will do a lot to improve the level of satisfaction and improve the situation and demonstrate that actually something's being done to support people who are at risk of being exploited. The government with the Act has issued a reporting criteria, and so there are 7 steps to that. So companies need to describe 7 key things around who they are as an entity and the structure of that entity. And that, in a sense, is quite basic for some organizations, although it can be quite complex for others that have lots of subsidiaries, and they might have lots of trusts as well. Shelf companies that are non-commercial. But the main action of the Modern Slavery Act has to do in the space of 3, 4, and 5, identifying the risks, describing the actions taken to address those risks, and point 5 is describing the process of effectiveness. How effective are those risks? How effective are those activities, those actions taken? Because there's all sorts of activities we can do to try and tackle this issue. But it's a really good question in not just this reporting mechanism, but a whole range of other mechanisms to make sure that what we're doing actually makes sense. It will actually have the intended outcome that we actually want it to have, and we're not just wasting our time doing things that actually don't have any value at all. 6 and 7 really are about if you're a complex entity, how have you consulted with those other entities? And 7 really is an opportunity for companies to demonstrate ways in which they've shined in this space. Perhaps they've got a partnership with a pig body association. Perhaps they've actually got a partnership with an NGO and they're working with a underserved community. All these things will, in a sense, go into the reporting, the report that the company is putting together for the government. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here for companies, and a lot of the work here, this is all something that will not occur overnight. No one is going to be able to address the issue of modern slavery overnight. Really, it's about taking reasonable steps, which is not the best expression, and I hope it changes once the legislation goes through its review in 2023, to actually take credible action to describe and then to report on the activities they've taken. And over time, through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of reporting, that there's actually a marked improvement, and that's actually brought about a change in the way that the company is actually doing business. If the mechanism is used appropriately, then it will actually lead to a culture change, and that's our theory of change with it. Just a little bit then on what is the New South Wales Act about. It's a slightly different piece of legislation, but actually in some sense has some stronger provisions to it. The New South Wales Act has an anti-slavery commissioner appointed. That's Dr. James Cockayne, and this differentiates from the Commonwealth Act, where the Department of Home Affairs and under them the Australian Border Force administered the legislation. And it's probably fair to say, as someone who's in this space, that one of the issues with the Commonwealth legislation is that the organisation running this or administering the legislation is largely nameless and faceless. And I think this plays into sort of the lack of direction that we see at the Commonwealth level. Contrast this to what we're seeing currently with Dr. James Cockayne, who's only been in the role since August last year, is actually having a front person who can actually drive the conversation, drive the advocacy, drive the engagement with state procurement and local governments and the private sector to actually do something significant in this place. And I think that adds a very different flavour to how this legislation is being rolled out in New South Wales. The focus for the New South Wales Act is really on state procurement for New South Wales, for state government entities and local governments. So here we could see, well, this is quite significant in the sense that the state government in New South Wales is really the largest procurer of goods and services in the country, apart from defence at a federal level. So the New South Wales government procurement for education, health, transport, ports, you name the department, it's enormous. It's an enormous piece of work. Local governments, there are 128 local councils in New South Wales, all needing to report in as well as all the companies that the government owns. The second piece of the pie has to do with survivor support services, and this is a lot of work that the Commission is currently doing, is actually working out how it is that we can actually support people who are victims in this country and actually provide the right appropriate services and pathways to care. So that's a big piece of work that's happening as well. There is no direct impact on the private sector, so on business. However, the impact will occur when a company is going to tender for business with government. So that's very much something to think about for you as an APPA member. In terms of tendering for business, you will need to actually demonstrate some level of due diligence in order to satisfy the tender process for government. So in terms of then how this all plays out for you, there's a great quote here from Justine Nolan and Marjan Bersma, who basically say that modern slavery sits on a continuum of exploitation. It should not and cannot be addressed in isolation. In our bid to manage, reduce, and eliminate modern slavery, we need first to acknowledge the larger contextual problems from which it emerges. We should treat the symptoms and the causes. So as we think about, and as you think about what this means for you as a small business, as a distributor, or as a supplier through your APPA membership, is to really work out what does the Modern Slavery Act mean for you as you think about your engagement with corporate clients, as you think about your ongoing, if you're thinking of scaling your business and growing your business and having a greater presence, and you're thinking about engaging with government, or you're engaging with many corporate clients, then there's a lot of work that you may need to consider and a lot of things that you need to do, and in order to understand the contextual problems from which it emerges. And in terms of the space in which you're operating in, there are lots of risks around, as we've already identified, the production of cotton, the harvesting of that cotton. There are risks around the production of all sorts of products like lanyards and caps and bottles, anything which, in a sense, products that have metal or something metallic in them will have risks pertaining to the harvesting or the mining of minerals such as mica. There's lots of risks, as you may be aware of, that you need to actually attend to, and really comes down to what your clients are looking for and what you need to do in response to that. So let's go and look more specifically at the impact of the Modern Slavery Act on small business. I'm just going to have a bit of a drink. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing emerging criterion around trends in ESG, so it's environmental, social, and governance. And there's an emerging criterion of major contracts. It's an emerging space in terms of anything linked to finance, and modern slavery is a component of the S, if you like, and so it's very much part of this broader landscape in which there's a need for companies to step up, and they will be filtered, in a sense, as companies will be filtered based on their compliance, level of compliance, and a whole range of ESG factors. There's a lot of going on at international level, and you may experience that yourself in terms of supply chain disruption, There's a big push against China due to the lack of transparency in supply chains. One of the dynamics that we're seeing in the space is that as the world, parts of the world, for example, like Australia and Western Europe, demand more transparency for companies, what we're seeing is actually an increased censorship in other countries, particularly China, and the access that leaders, auditors, reporters, companies have to actually verifying risks in China, and particularly in the Xinjiang province, where it's virtually impossible now to actually understand what's going on because of the activities of the Chinese government towards auditors and the media in that part of the world. There are also, we're seeing the shutting down of factories due to the lack of environmental standards. So the environmental issues are probably the big brother in the space, and it's actually having an impact on business and manufacturing in particular. So there's some things that you might like to consider in this space, and I like to show this graph, which is around appetite and capacity. And one of the challenges for small business is around these two axes of appetite and capacity. On the vertical axis, we have organizational appetite, and even at the big end of town, even for organizations who are meant to be reporting, there is a big challenge to actually maintain the appetite to work in this space. And we're seeing that through our engagement with companies who are, in a sense, who may be tempted to see this issue as a nice to have, and maybe that's true for you today, that this is something which is off the radar and it's nice to have. My encouragement to you today is to not treat this area of reporting or human rights due diligence as a nice to have. We need to actually shift our thinking and see that addressing issues like modern slavery and related human rights violations are actually something that are more essential than non-essential, and increasingly so. On the vertical axis, then we have the key issue of resourcing, and we do understand at Unchained that different organizations have different capacity to actually do things. Some are severely under-resourced and don't have any capacity to do anything, and that's where we, in terms of our partnership with APPA, are here to assist and to help you build that capacity to resource you in the work that you need to do, and those who are perhaps more well-placed and better resourced. And so what we're seeing that from our perspective, those who see modern slavery due diligence as essential and they're well-resourced are therefore the best place to be agile, robust and business ready, and to maintain their license to operate in an emerging ESG landscape. You can be obviously well-resourced, but see this issue as non-essential and therefore be in the category of indifferent. The worst category obviously is to be ignorant, to be under-resourced and see this as a non-essential, or responsive at least to see this as essential, but you don't have the capacity to do much about it. And that's where we want to encourage you who, in joining today, perhaps, you might be in that category. You might, where you see this as something which is essential for your business, but you don't necessarily have the resources to address the issue. What we're seeing in terms of what the big players are looking for as we engage with SMEs, and we do have lots of conversations with small business, is really we're seeing some trends that have emerged over the last 3 years in terms of what corporate clients are actually asking their suppliers in Australia to do. So, for example, I recently was having engagement with a recruitment firm here in Australia, which was owned. It was owned by an Indigenous person, so it was an Indigenous-run company. That they have seen a shift in what companies are asking them to do. So, for example, 3 years ago, it was simply just a matter of having a policy in place, having a modern slavery policy or a human rights policy in place, and that was enough to satisfy corporates. But they, in talking to me late last year, it was clear that the dial had shifted for them, and it was not just enough for them to actually have a policy. They now needed to actually do some more work. That work included providing point 3, people in terms of people and culture, providing more education, both at the high level around awareness of the issues, but also some skills training for those who are at the forefront of engaging with suppliers. So that was a shift that they discerned they needed to up their game. in training and education. The other work they need to do, going back to point 1 around governance, was not just to have a modern slavery position statement, but to also have a much more robust and ethical policy portfolio with clear procedures and a clear strategy to integrate those policies into the organization, not just have a policy that sits on file somewhere and no one actually knows what it means or does anything with it. One of the key components of that is to have a code of conduct in place, and also to, in a sense, be able to subscribe to the supply of code of conduct that is being issued by the client. At point 2, there's also been a shift in terms of risk management. So a need to actually dig a little bit and understand for suppliers, to understand who their suppliers are, to understand perhaps if they have access to factories, what are the state of those factories, to be prepared to be audited, and to perhaps have a mechanism by which they actually audit their own suppliers. There's a big push in certifications as well, to actually step up and demonstrate due diligence by actually adopting a number of certifications. That could be an ISO, for example, or an SA, or having some sort of social traders status, or a B Corp status, for example. Lots of different certifications to be applied, as well as then a growing commitment to ethical sourcing. So not just understanding the risks in terms of your own supply chain, but also then having a strategy to actually start sourcing more ethically. And if I just go quickly then and see if I can do this quickly, but I don't know if I will. See how successful I am. Oh, here we go. Good. Yeah, here's some examples that have been shared to me in terms of some work that's been done. So this one here is AS Color, who are part of APPA, and here is part of their page in terms of demonstrating their commitment to ethical sourcing, their commitment to initiatives such as the Better Cotton Initiative. Some examples around other social enterprises that they work with and who they support.
Sorry, Stephen, that's the sharing on that screen hasn't come through.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me know. That's good. It's helpful. Let me stop the share and reshare. There we go. Thank you for letting me know that. Sorry. Different certifications. So here's the OESKO Tech's certification, standard certification. So that's something they've stepped up into, which is regarding the environmental component, a commitment to sourcing, commitment to understanding their supply chain, and their future commitments, and how they, all sorts of things, not just related to modern slavery, for example, but environmental as well, and other human rights issues, and in terms of use of plastics. So there's lots of different components that go into. There's the information on their code of conduct. So that's just an example from AS Color in terms of what they're doing, and they've made that publicly available to both consumer and their corporate clients, to show to the public, this is where we stand, this is what we're doing, this is what we've signed up for, and this is what we're committed to. So some good practice there. Other examples are the Apparel Australia. So they've got that on their page as well. This is their ethical sourcing policy, and what they expect, where they're, in a sense, what they stand on certain impact areas, and then they've also got some links there as well around their policies and SEDEX declaration. The Ethical Merch Co. I think Nathan's on the call today, so I don't want to misrepresent him, but another good practice organization with commitments of their own to ethical sourcing. They've got their own modern slavery statement and own commitments to the environment and human rights standards as well, and with some testimonies there from their clients as well. DPP also has a corporate social responsibility policy. Again, lots of details and some customers testimonies as well in terms of what they're doing. So companies, and also this is new promo hubs. Well, sorry, I'm just trying to get the thing. Again, they've got their own commitments to their process and what they're doing, and making it very clear on their website, what they're committed to and what they how they monitor and control the production of their goods and services. So some great examples there of good practice for you to look at, and those links can be shared as well. Let me just go back to my other screen. Yeah, so basically there are three main areas that corporate clients are looking at for small players around governance, risk management, and people and culture. And they're increasingly looking to see what small players are doing, both distributors and suppliers are actually saying about themselves. And of all this, really, if you want to think about this in terms of the business case, you might like to think of the 3 Ps. There's much that can be said around profile, purpose, and profit. In terms of your profile, by actually stepping up and doing that voluntarily, which most of you will be doing, you will better position yourself in terms of your profile, because we are in an age where increasingly, both for finance as well as for custom, companies are needing to demonstrate ethical or sustainable or responsible practices. Unchained, for example, ourselves, we are a candidate for B Corp. We are still in the mix of trying to get fully assessed. That's almost been 12 months. But we are being in this space as a consultant, we see that it's important to also demonstrate that we actually have all the policies in place and not just expect our clients to do so. There's a lot to be said around purpose and employee satisfaction and retention, which also can add to your bottom line. Young people, especially the Gen X, Y, Z, and Alphas, are increasingly looking for purpose-driven businesses to work with. And so it's important that organizations, in a sense, protect their bottom line through employee retention and satisfying those needs. And finally, there's the issue of profits. If you want to maintain your license to operate, then this is going to affect your bottom line as you step into this space. So I just want to stop there. I want to thank you so much for listening to me, and really want to make this an opportunity for people to ask questions. If there's been any questions that have been brought to our attention, I'll stop the share.
There are no questions at the moment, but I might just give it a minute, see if anybody wants to post anything. Okay, we have Adrian Davidson. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate that.
Parry Laxman, thank you for the information.
Thanks, Parry. Well, look, even if there's no questions today, perhaps you might go away from today. I may have blasted you with too much information, which is, might need to go away and think about that. But you're more than welcome to connect with me after this, our time today. You can connect with me using my QR code there, which is on the screen. That sends you not to a page where you give me your information. That sends you to my link tree, which gives you all my handles and email address, and all the ways in which you can connect with me and set up a meeting. I'm very, very open to talking with people about this issue and how we can help and work with together, and exploring strategies for your business.
Awesome. And lastly, Nathan Kingston, well done. Great work.
Thank you, Nathan.
Well, it looks like we haven't got any more questions or messages, so we'll close off the session. Thank you, Stephen, for a fantastic presentation. Over the coming days, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to view today's recording, the PowerPoint presentation, and other relevant information. APPA members can reach out to Stephen via stephen.morse@unchainedsolutions.com.au or via LinkedIn. But I will include this information as part of the post-webinar email. On behalf of Stephen and APPA, thank you all for participating and joining us today, and all have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.